We'll just start this meeting in silence together for 15 minutes. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So for today's conversation, it'll be heavily led in part due to a lot of conversations that I've been having this past week. And one conversation in particular that I had with a friend on the weekend, where we were breaking down and discussing there's no free will. And, we were talking about, we could see the interlinking of everything and how really when she was like, just even from a psychological or neuroscience perspective, I can actually see it, see that every choice, what feels like a choice, is actually linked to a million other things that came before it. And she sat there for a little bit and then she said, what about goals? She said, now I'm at a loss as to, do I have goals? Do I not have goals? I innately like to have them. What do I do? And I said, I'll ask Mutribo. So what could you say about that?
Goals are simply part of the unfolding of your destiny, part of an expression of the body-mind that you're identified with. So they will arise and come into play and be satisfied or frustrated according to your destiny. And I think it's important to remember that the ability to see that effective free will is an illusion doesn't really change much in the way you live your life. You'll find that things go on in the way that they always have, but there is, of course, one important difference, and that is the suffering that has been associated with you taking ownership of the apparent choices you make. That will lessen and eventually completely disappear as the understanding deepens. So goals aren't against free will. Goals simply come under that banner of the next most obvious thing to do. So if it is in your nature, if it is in your destiny, if it is in the programming of your particular body-mind that you have a tendency towards enjoying and creating goals for yourself, then that will almost certainly continue. But what won't continue is the way you beat yourself up when those goals aren't met, that you fail in some way in your own estimation, or the way you give yourself an excessive amount of pride and arrogance when you have managed to make your goals actually come true. So it simply takes away this misperception of personal doership. It doesn't actually change the way you live your life.
And what about how to tell the subtlety between if you're a naturally goal-orientated person, which I feel like most modern Westerners are, it's like you've got to go after it, is the thinking. And there's a subtle, spontaneous arising of that feels nice, that feels good, I want to aim myself in that direction. Versus, and there's obviously a big lots of shades of grey in between here, versus that, oh God, I need to be a more goal-orientated person, I've got to get my life together, I should create goals, and all these successful people have goals, and now I've got to go after it. They're two extremes. How can you lean into and feel into the subtlety of which is happening spontaneously and which is coming from a thinking-doing structure?
I think this understanding around free will takes time to settle. And so it's a question of you becoming used to this new perception that has landed in you. And I want to again emphasize that this is an understanding. This is not an intellectual project. It may start off with an intellectual understanding when you close your eyes for 20 minutes, look at the actions that you've taken during the last day and analyze how they started and where they came from. And that then you realize in that analysis that your free will didn't actually play any part in that. There can be that initial understanding on an intellectual level, but the understanding, for it to be worth anything, has to fall onto a deeper level, way below that. And that takes time. It takes time, and the way it's easy to measure that is to see how quickly the understanding is there in your awareness when faced with a particular choice that you're describing. So to take the two that you mentioned there, let's start with the one where you're beating yourself up about not having the goals that you see everyone else having. So first of all, the initial inquiry for me would be, what is the actual motivation that's going on there? What is it that you're trying to achieve by having these goals, or by becoming like everyone else you see around you? That would be the first interesting area of inquiry. But as far as free will goes, it's just simply when that understanding kicks in, when you're beset by I should be having more goals, when that understanding kicks in and goes, actually, no, I don't need to do that, because that, if it's supposed to happen, will happen. And that in and of itself sets you free of whatever suffering and stress you may be experiencing around not living up to some expectation that someone else put in you a long time ago. And on the more positive side of the goal orientation, when you're enjoying the fact that you set yourself targets, you set yourself goals, well, there's nothing really needs to be changed with that. If you're enjoying, then enjoy. It's that simple. Pain is a call for your attention. Joy isn't. No one ever really moved when they were joyful and happy. Why would you? Everything's fine. So as long as the goals that you're setting yourself are working for you and not making you unhappy and not making you stressed and not making you in any way out of balance with a deeper part of yourself, then there's no problem. But it's when those goals start to take on that darker side, where you realize that you're pushing yourself, that you're actually responding in a way that isn't necessarily aligned with the deepest core of you, but is being stimulated by a conditioning that someone else gave you. So it's a question of feeling your way into this understanding. But again, I want to emphasize, even though there is an initial period where these concepts are intellectually agreed with and taken on board, the understanding itself will normally take some time to settle. And the way you'll see that settling take place in you is how quickly that understanding is there when it is called for. One thing to remember is an intellectual understanding can't be relied upon. It's only an understanding that's sunk into the deepest part of you that you no longer need to remember, because it's simply become the way you perceive, the way you understand. It's only that understanding that will have any lasting value.
Because it was interesting when we were having the conversation, and you see that shift between the mind going like, wait, what? and then that amazing relaxation in the body when it's like the system gets aligned and goes, oh yeah, this actually feels and makes perfect sense. And then that very quick, like, but wait, what? That comes up in the thinking mind, the argumentativeness that we have around this. But what about this? Or what about that? And that fear of, hang on a minute, the whole ship will just like completely fall apart in the middle of the ocean unless I keep it all together. And I think one of the big struggles, what that conversation led to, was another conversation around how business is structured. And businesses are all structured around goals and targets that are all made up. And everyone's then forced to conform to these targets. You know, my husband's going through something interesting at the moment where he kind of can't get to the bottom of like, but where are the targets coming from that are being, you know, everyone's got to work to these targets, but they're ultimately plucked out of thin air, you know, but the stress and the friction that's created in moving towards them. And so when we move from, or what feels to be more palatable, more calming, more clear, is working in our sort of emotional and personal lives with this, and then trying to carry it, or not trying to, but aligning it into the work day, the business, being employed or being an employer, and working with these kind of structures. Have you got any advice around that? Because I know you've had many businesses.
Again, it's something that will unfold according to your destiny. Mm. If this understanding lands inside of you, then its effects can be very radical in the way you start living your life. And that may be shown and demonstrated by you no longer feeling a particular environment that you've been in up until that point as being appropriate any longer, as being something that suits you, that fits you. And I'm not saying by that to understand that there is no effective free will means you can never work in the modern world. That's simply not true. But according to your destiny, it may be that this understanding leads you into places inside yourself that push you in different directions, that allows that destiny to unfold in a different way. I think really the crux of your question, if you look at it, is how does this personal understanding interface with society? That's essentially the crux of the problem. And to give you one example, when you see that there is no personal free will, then this whole idea of personal responsibility starts to fall away. And in it falling away, you no longer suffer in the way you did before. So when you hurt someone before, and that caused them difficulty and pain, you might have felt ashamed, or you might have felt like you'd done something wrong. With this understanding, when some action that happens through your body-mind ends up hurting someone, possibly someone you love, you won't any longer torture yourself that you did something bad. You will see it as something that had to happen through your body-mind in relation to this other person. And you may still not be happy to see something that happened through your body-mind hurt someone that you may love, but you will simply then feel regret. But you won't take on board ownership that you did that particular action. Now, that's how it works within the personal realm. But when that personal realm interfaces with society, obviously different things come into play. So if you go down to the corner shop and decide that you're going to steal something off one of the shelves and get caught, society will hold you responsible for that action that happened through your body-mind. You will have to suffer the consequences of whatever society deems to be appropriate in that particular case. If you go to your business example of working in the business world, then if there's something that happens through you that is not aligned to the particular environment and the rules of that particular structure that you're working in, then again, you will have to suffer those consequences. Now, it may be, as I said earlier, that the understanding lands so deeply that the consequences you have to suffer by not any longer accepting that what happens through you is actually your responsibility, means that you part ways with that particular job and go and find something that is more aligned with yourself. But there was one great story that my last teacher, Ramesh Balsekar, used to tell, because this understanding about having no effective free will, as this filters more and more out into the general consciousness, it will start having effects on how we deal with punishment. And I think they will be beneficial effects, because society will still need to have some sort of control over people who do something that isn't acceptable within that society. But the way they judge that may change. If they start seeing people operating in a way that isn't actually something to do with them, but something more to do with their conditioning, with the environment that they grew up in, all of those background stories in a particular individual's life, then the compassion and the appropriateness of the punishment and the rehabilitation will automatically change in the light of that insight. But as it stands at the moment, society isn't at that place. That would be a much more sophisticated development within society for that to take place. But there was this one great story that Ramesh used to tell about a lawyer defending his client in a court of law in front of a judge. And I can't remember what the client had been accused of, but whatever the crime was, the lawyer stood up in front of the judge and said, "Your Honor, my client has no free will, and he is conditioned by all of the things that have happened to him before, so he cannot be held responsible for this crime that he did, that happened through him." And the judge looked at the lawyer and then quietly said to him, "I understand your argument, but in exactly the same way that you can't hold your client responsible for the crime he did, I cannot find myself responsible from finding him guilty and punishing him." So there isn't a way out to avoid responsibility vis-à-vis society and the structures that we have to operate with. But depending on the destiny of the individual and how that understanding lands in them, then it's possible that either they find a seamless way to continue working. In fact, their work may become more efficient and better because this understanding may prevent them getting into difficulty with their co-workers, with their fellow employees. It may make their life in that company much smoother. Or it may be that they come to a conclusion where actually this is no longer right for me.
And this is sort of a segue, but on a personal note, something that I've noticed happening more and more inside of myself is either there will be friction or conflict or something that doesn't feel good, and there's a very peaceful just letting it go, but also there's more frequently an inability to let it go, not in a neurotic way. So I had a conflict with a friend a week ago, shared it with Aaron, my husband, and he was like, "Don't worry about it, just let it go. It's probably nothing." But it kept pulling at me, and we ended up having a conversation about it that honestly felt sort of unnecessary. I could see that, but we both got an amazing resolution out of it and lots of expansion and feel much tighter and closer. It's a really beautiful thing. I find that as time is passing, the temptation to just let things be, or that if there's a knot, if that makes sense, in the thread, it needs to be unraveled now. It's like I can't leave the stones unturned. There's such a physical discomfort with knowing it's so uncomfortable to have to loop back, but not loop it, having to do it later is actually worse. Have you found that for yourself?
Again, this is part of the process of this understanding landing, and I think The further you go in this direction, the more it becomes impossible to leave those stones unturned, to leave those knots unaddressed. I think that is a demonstration, a mirroring of the extra space and clarity that is landing in an individual, and that it no longer is possible for them to skate over the things that they used to do before, or it's no longer possible for them to say that this will be all right, this doesn't matter. It sticks, as you pointed out, it sticks somewhere inside of them, and they're forced to address it. All this understanding does is fine-tune your own sensitivity towards the deepest part of you. That's essentially what any spiritual journey is about removing any blockages, removing any barriers still inside of you, put there from all of the conditioning that you've gone through in your life, all of the experience that you've had in your life. When those start to become more and more loose, become less and less blocked in and of themselves, then there is an added awareness of any block that is there, and an added incentive to remove that block as well.
So it's a matter of paying attention, a lot of attention.
Again, who's paying attention? Attention will be there if attention is needed. In the case you just gave the example of, you had this thing come up, Aaron said drop it, you couldn't. So the attention was not able to move on inside of you from the issue without that resulting in a profound talk that had beautiful consequences from it. So if there is something there, it will call your attention. Again, I emphasize an understanding that needs to be remembered isn't worth anything. It simply becomes another intellectual exercise that you're trying to force on your life. And this journey, this understanding, this spiritual process is about getting rid of those kind of restrictions in your life, of allowing yourself to come back to the natural, spontaneous flow of the way your particular body-mind is programmed to work in this manifestation.
And what are your thoughts on psychedelics and plant medicine? This is from one of my students, wanted to ask you this. Let me get the exact wording right. They were concerned that it's a shortcut to experiencing that amazing unity, and feeling like, that landing of like, oh, everything all of a sudden makes sense, and then they contract back and go back to their daily life, and then feel like they want to hook back into that. Their worry is that, am I trying to create a shortcut so I don't have to do the daily work of meditating and taking care of my body and, living in alignment, as they called it, which they know what that looks like. Or is it actually helpful? Because it sort of gives you oh, okay, is this where I'm aiming? Is this where I'm heading? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that substances that alter your consciousness, whatever they may be, are a double-edged sword. That basically they have a potential for profound insight. For instance, in the 60s when LSD emerged and acid emerged, so many people experienced their first real opening to a deeper understanding of what this place is about, of how this place is designed, through taking that particular drug. And as such, that insight would have, not in every case, but in many cases, would have then propelled them on a path that allowed them to take that particular search and inquiry deeper. I think the danger with substances that provide, as your friend was saying, a shortcut into a so-called spiritual or mystical experience is that they are just that in the end. They can be very useful to draw back that veil, to draw back that curtain onto a deeper reality. But if you consistently have to go back to that substance in order to be able to see that, then clearly there is a dependence there. And I think it's a very tricky area because the experiences are beautiful on substances that alter your consciousness in many cases. I mean, they can also be
harrowing,
terrifying and scary, but it needs awareness and attention, and it can go wrong. People can get lost in it. And I think what I would always recommend for anyone involved in it is to make sure that they were spending enough time with themselves in silence and meditation when not on a particular substance journey, to make sure that that connection, that basic fundamental connection, was still alive and well and hadn't been subsumed or obscured by this particular aspect of their life at that particular moment of taking substances that altered their consciousness. So there is no real easy answer to this. And my recommendation is always, you want to be free. You want to be here in this body-mind, free. That is, for me, the ultimate goal of being a human being, is to experience that peace and serenity and joy and happiness of simply being relaxed and free as you are, without any extra aids, including meditation. That's the ultimate target for me. And I think along the way, these substances that alter consciousness can be amazingly useful, but they can also be a sidetrack. They can also be something that wastes time and that is dangerous because the experiences are so powerful that it's very easy to start to believe that that's it. And then there is a tendency to become not necessarily chemically addicted, but psychologically addicted to keep repeating that experience. And to be fair, the same can happen in meditation. When you have deep experiences of insight in meditation, one of the things that every meditator learns to watch is to observe and let go as much as possible of the attachment to that space and trying to make it happen again. It's not in your control. These things will go according to your destiny.
And that's why I love meditation. Because that, oh wow, and I had that particular tea and then I sat in that particular space and I had such a deep meditation. I'll do that again, and you have such a different experience, and you're like, you learn over the years that all of that controlling is just so futile. Okay, so I think it's very topical at the moment, the use of psychedelics, and it seems to be growing in popularity, it's on the rise, but in a different way, from my understanding from what happened in the 60s, in that it's now, they're tools for productivity. We've got friends in Silicon Valley, who microdose psilocybin so they can be more productive at work. And then all the way through to the other spectrum where people are obviously using them, they say, as guides and tools for consciousness. What do you think's happening in this particular moment in time that they're becoming so much more mainstream? So meditation as well is becoming more mainstream, but all the sort of the tools and practices that support an expansion of consciousness, are you noticing it? I mean, you listen to any podcast or it seems to be on the rise. What do you think's going on?
I think my particular generation that grew up in the 60s, we were essentially using these substances as recreation, for fun. And it was only by chance that we fell into a much deeper meaning with them. You know, I think what's taken place over the 50 years or so that have gone in between, 60 years, is that everything's become more refined in that way. So you now see acid and psilocybin and MDMA being used to help people who have PTSD from maybe Afghanistan or some war zone. You start to see them being used in a medicinal way that I can only imagine can be incredibly helpful. So for me, it feels completely right that the substances that we approached in a recreational way and in not a very scientific way have now been taken up by a broader scientific medical community and given a sharper focus, a more practical way of using them to get the very best out of what they offer and hopefully avoid what isn't so great about them, you know. So I think that movement is perfectly aligned, and it actually makes me happy that society is opening itself up to those substances that had such an effect on my particular generation. I think that's a beautiful outcome that has taken place over the intervening years. As far as using chemicals and drugs to enhance your performance, I mean, there's something going on at the moment within the sporting world where they want to start an enhanced games where people are allowed to dope and take drugs to improve the performance of their bodies.
That's wild. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and there's people who are for it and against it. I think these things will reveal themselves to be what they are over a period of time. I don't think inherently there's anything wrong in it. Again, what I always come back to is, what do you want? What is your goal? Do you just want to be a successful businessman? Great. Well, these things may help you succeed in Silicon Valley. More power to you. But if your attention, if your interest is drawn a little deeper into trying to understand those three fundamental questions, who am I, where did I come from, and where am I going to? If you're drawn to that level of inquiry, then I think there are ways to access that are much deeper.
So I know little bits and pieces of your meditation, let's call it journey, adventure. But one of my students was really drilling down into what techniques has he tried and when did he start meditating and how much does he meditate today. They were really interested in this. So, and it's been asked of me actually a couple of times, but can you walk me through when you first started meditating and then what that little trajectory looked like and how you landed today?
I can, but I want to start right away with saying this path of inquiry is your path. Of course, I and everyone can take whatever help they can find on the outside of themselves, people who've gone before, to steer them in the right direction, to point them in the right direction, those signposts back home. But I want to emphasize that anything that anyone else said can be used as an experiment for yourself. The final marker of anything that works for you is inside yourself. So whatever anyone says that worked for them, try it. See if that helps you. And if it does, wonderful. And if it doesn't, don't get caught in trying to stay aligned with some version of a copy that isn't necessarily going to be you. So I think it's important always to remember that the path of spirituality is an individual path. Right now there are a little over 7 billion individuals in this manifestation. And each one of them, if it was their destiny to go into spirituality, would find their own individual path. Of course, there would be, within the expressions, of those people, once that understanding landed, there would be many things that you could see were similar, but there would be the flavor of originality, of individuality in each individual case, you know. So my own journey, very briefly, started with Osho. Before an Osho book landed in my lap, I really had not been exposed to the world of meditation at all. I was, by that time, quite involved with the New Age therapeutic movement that was going on in London at that time in the mid-70s. But it was Osho who first introduced me to the idea of meditation. And so my meditation started with that input, and it very much centered around the practice of Vipassana right away. One of the first groups that I did when I arrived in Pune was a 10-day Vipassana retreat. And over the course of what is now 40 years, over 40 years, that focus on meditation has come and gone depending on what else has been going on in my life. So I don't have a CV that can show that meditation was always an alive part of my daily practice. It hasn't been. It's actually after Osho left the body and I found myself in Australia that I started to move much more deeply into my own meditative practice, and then with my retreats in India. So mine has been a journey that has involved a lot of living, a lot of experiencing in daily life, with relationship, with work, with building a commune with Osho, with filmmaking, with all sorts of different aspects of my own individual life. And the underlying beat of all of it has always been a spiritual inquiry. But the actual practice of meditation only really became focused in my life in my early 40s. But it was only then that I started to go, okay, I need to go in. I need to spend more and more time with myself, getting to understand this thing that I'm identified with and how it works.
And could you just add a little bit on about your time in India? Because it's a pretty wild thing to say, I'm going to go by myself and sit in silence for months on end and meditate. There must have been a big pull inside to make that commitment.
Yes, it was stimulated by a visiting teacher here in Byron that I came to know, and he just dropped a casual comment in one of the satsangs that I attended with him, which was, he said, if people want their meditation to go deeper, I recommend 6 months silence. And as soon as I heard him say that, I just saw this thing come up inside of me of like, I want to do that. And it was that, again, that impulse, that beat, that underlying beat of the spiritual journey. Again, that was another example. There's been many examples of that beat coming to the fore suddenly and undeniably in my life. That was one of them. And that it was that understanding, that moment of seeing I want that took me to India. And then I did a period of 4 months and then another period of 3 months in silence. And I think essentially what was going on for me beyond what I can only place at something I don't understand, beyond my destiny, which it obviously was I wanted to really understand before I died that I was okay with my own aloneness. And there's a quote on the wall here from Osho. It says, "Unless you are capable of being alone, your search for truth will remain a failure. Your aloneness is your truth. Your aloneness is your divineness. And I was very much aware within my own daily life that I would still suffer periods of feeling very lonely rather than alone, that I hadn't somehow reconciled the psychological foundations of that unsettledness inside of myself. So a lot of my motivation outside of wanting to go deeper in my spiritual journey was wanting to make sure that this body-mind that I was identified with was something that I could be friends with no matter what the circumstances were that were going on outside of it. If I could not find a place inside myself where I was at peace with being where I found myself with this identification, I could see there was no hope. My life could never be happy unless that fundamental relationship with yourself is sorted. What hope is there of anything else ever being able to substitute that? If you see that clearly, that focuses you on what I call the bullseye, the target. If you understand that it all comes down to you and your relationship with yourself, if you understand at a deeper level that that is all there is, that you are the source of your experience and everything that takes place within that experience. And the proof of it is, in deep sleep, every night, the world is gone. The world doesn't exist anymore. You conceive that for the world to exist for you, your consciousness needs to be there. So once you see that you are the central player, not in an egoic way, but in a fundamental way, that the energetic way, you are the source of this particular life that is being lived through you, that you are identified with, then that takes away all of those peripheral circles around that target and allows you to focus on really what has the possibility of radically altering how it is for you to be here. So that was very much my motivation when I went to India to do those silences, was to make sure that I no longer felt afraid by my own aloneness, that was no longer something that was a burden for me, that was in the way. And that took place in those silences. That was settled with them.
I do know that there are friends and students of mine at the moment who are feeling the call, the pull. And I think the framework of how we would love to address and set up the students that are going to join us in July, this will be important for other people to hear in regards to how do you approach something like this? Just for anyone that's listening and thinks, oh God, hang on, I'm feeling that urge to spend, even if it's 2 days or 10 days or a month or something in silence meditating. Let's talk about in the lead up to, what's your advice on how to prepare the mind and body for that, what I call basically fasting, where you're not reading, you're not listening, there's no absorption of anything outside of one's own experience. Would you recommend a pare down of activity, any kind of preparation? But what are the markers on and things people should look for in regards to entering a period of silence?
The retreat space is so rare in this world that we live in. To decide to lock yourself away from all of the outside influences that affect your daily life, from the TV, from the phone, from the movies, from your family, from your workplace, from all of that, is a radical step. And very, very few people are either able or willing to make it. So it's not something that I find is necessarily the top item on people's bucket lists to lock themselves away in silence in retreat. And the reason for that is because it is, in essence, confronting. Because basically what a retreat does is take you out of the normal routine and habit of your comfort zone and force you just to be with yourself. Now, in a way, that's an oxymoron. To force someone to be with themselves sounds ridiculous, because each of us love ourselves the most. So why is it that we have to force ourselves, that we have to push ourselves in this direction? How did we get to this space where a retreat is needed? What is it about the way we're living our lives that no longer is satisfying something inside of us that wants to go deeper, that wants to be quieter, that wants to have more time, more relaxation, that wants to understand as much as possible as to where we are, how this place is set up? So it's a rare phenomenon. And as far as preparing for it, I wouldn't necessarily say there is any particular right or wrong way of doing that. I think people can go cold turkey and be running till the last moment, or they can gradually ease themselves into it, or anything in between. For me, the preparation doesn't matter. What matters is that the people have decided to go into silence for an extended period of time, and everything will be resolved in that experience. There isn't, I don't believe, a right or wrong way to prepare yourself to go into this space. But the fact that you've decided that you want to do it is an amazing thing in and of itself. The fact that you care enough about this relationship with yourself, that you want to examine it in the best possible set of circumstances, as undisturbed and as focused as you can possibly be, says a huge amount of where you've come in your own journey with yourself. The very fact that you're feeling that call is a mark of, for me, immense maturity right there. Because for most people, silence is very freaky. It's a very freaky space for most people to shut up, to not talk, to not be busy with everything, just to be with themselves. So I know I'm not really preparing anyone in the way that maybe you would have liked me to, but it's basically that is how I see it. The people coming on the retreat, the fact that they're coming for me is absolutely wonderful. For me, that is the main thing. Just come. Just be there with yourself. You will see what happens from that. And what I can guarantee is you will not leave, after 10 days, you will not leave that space the same person. You will not. That I know is true. As far as what happens, as far as what takes place, that's what you will find out. That's why you're going there. It's for those insights. It's for that difficulty. You'll also experience difficulty with it. So it's all of those experiences that you then can own for yourself. You can see clearly and uninterrupted that you start to actually come closer and closer to yourself. And then from that space, it's possible to re-enter the world and start to look again at how you're living your daily life and to see if that matches up with what you've experienced when all of that was gone, when all of that was over.
And how important do you think it is to not reading? Because I've done many silent retreats where you were allowed to read, like there was the monastery library and so forth. For me personally, I would never recommend anyone read now, only because that fasting of the mind and watching the mechanics of its desperation I mean, reading the back of a shampoo bottle, reading your toothpaste, like, what am I doing, like, over and over? You know, ingredients you can't even pronounce. I've been there where you just, like, my mind is like, let me sink my teeth into something, or, like, reading the, you know, the sides of the books, you know, not technically picking them up. And now I would say definitely avoid reading anything so that you can really see the experience of what your mind is doing when it's craving distraction. But what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with you. That basically, all of the ways that your mind wants to run from being engaged with your own inquiry with yourself, it's something that isn't going to be useful for this particular space of retreat. So I would always suggest that people cut all of that out and just be with themselves. And yes, it takes some time to settle after the busyness of the way we all live our lives. It takes some time, some days, for you to start to settle. But when you do, it's so worth it. And the more that you're trying to delay or avoid that focus, that presence with yourself, then the longer it will be before that breakthrough, that insight, those moments of understanding takes place. And that's why you're there. You're there to be able to experience what being alive is like when everything feels just right. That's what a retreat is. Fundamentally, it's the opportunity to actually experience within your body-mind what you feel like when there is nothing left for you to care about, when everything is exactly as it is, where it is, and nothing needs to change.
And what about for the person that is listening to this, whether they're coming on our retreat or they're going it solo, that is very well aware of their tech addictions? And, you know, we had someone come on one of the retreats who then kicked themselves senseless because on day 3 they were like, I just need to really do this important thing. Jumped onto emails, then jumped onto text, then jumped into WhatsApp, and then was like, oh, well, I've ruined it now, so I'll just keep doing this, you know, secretively every day. I've been there. I know that well for myself. What would you, like, how disciplined and focused would you say someone needs to be in regards to resisting that temptation?
Basically, a retreat is an invitation for every individual to move as deeply as they can within themselves. And any device they may find themselves using that takes away that focus is just working against themselves. And unfortunately, it also works against the whole space of the retreat, because in a retreat, everyone is connected energetically. And so I always recommend that people fundamentally take responsibility for what they want for themselves, but also understand that their space will either enhance or detract from other people's energetic space, because we're all so connected in that. So for me, there's not really any compromise. I would always recommend people just to stay with yourself, even if it hurts, even if it's the most frustrating thing. What you're resisting is yourself. If you see that, if you see the moment you reach for your phone, you're running away from yourself. Why? Ask that question. What is going on here? Why do I need that phone in my hand now? What is it I'm not prepared to look at? I'm not prepared to take on board. Those questions are the fundamental questions of retreat. And so even if you fall and you find yourself playing with the device, the response that that person gave on the last retreat isn't the right one, that I've done it now, I'll just keep doing it. No, it's Rumi's one, the Sufi mystic Rumi. Even though you've broken your vow 1,000 times, come, yet again come. So you can always start from now, but don't be stupid. you can make as many mistakes as you want because there aren't any mistakes. Just see if you don't make the same ones all the time. That's what Einstein, I think, defined as the definition of insanity. The more focus, I resist the word discipline because of its other connotations, but the more responsibility, the more care you have for yourself and by extension for the other people who are there with you in that space, the better it will be for you and for everyone else.
Beautiful. Any last little tips or pointers for anyone listening?
I can only end with just a thorough recommendation that whenever you have time to go inside yourself, don't miss it. You carry everything you need inside yourself for the understanding to take place. There's nothing missing inside of anyone. There may be a destiny that doesn't take them in that direction, but there's nothing essentially missing because there is only one thing here, and that is consciousness. Dressed up in all these different myriad roles that are playing out in this manifestation, but there is only one thing. If you want to understand and become one with that one thing, then take every opportunity you can to move inside yourself, because that's its source. Its source lies inside of you. Once you reconnect with that source, once that source is alive in your life, you are in this amazing opportunity of still being identified in a simple way with a human body-mind organism that is still alive, heart beating, and yet not in any way under any illusion that that body-mind is who you are. The combination of that awareness, that consciousness, and the amazing opportunity of this incredible sensory apparatus that has been given to you, the combination of those two, that clarity of awareness and that amazing let go that then allows that body-mind to respond effortlessly, naturally and spontaneously to whatever happens to it, that is the zenith of human experience. That is bliss.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack, too. So we'll just end, as we always do, with another 15 minutes of silence. So just close your eyes, take your awareness back to your body and your breath, and go in and be with whatever is.